What's going on, guys? Luke here with Shift to Strength. Today we're going to discuss 4 red flags that indicates that your core is weak. Because if you have a weak core and an unstable foundation, every single one of your lifts is going to suffer. So take the time, look through this video, see if you have any of these red flags. If you do, if you have more than one in particular, it may be time to reassess your core strength, maybe start developing your core a bit more, and then coming back to the main lift. People think of the core, they often think of the abs. You have to think about the core as actually a cylinder that wraps around the body and connects the upper and lower halves together. So some of the main muscles that you may not know that are involved in the core are what's called the inner core unit, where we actually breathe and develop tension and create that before we lift. The muscles that make up this inner unit are the multifidus, the inner obliques, the diaphragm, and the pelvic floor muscles. All those muscles together create a balloon that wrap around the core and stabilize us. From there we have the outer core unit. Now those we would call more global muscles, or muscles that connect the upper and lower body, so the rib cage down into the pelvis. That would be things such as the rectus abdominis, so the front of our core here. Think about the external obliques on the side, our erector spinae on the back, so those 2 muscles running down the back, as well as we also have our hips. So a lot of people don't understand that the hips actually play an integral part of the core as well. From the side view, we have the abs and the glutes actually sandwiching together to create what's called a neutral spine. And a neutral spine is fundamental to every single lift you do. If you cannot create a neutral spine in your lifting, that right there is a red flag that you need to start addressing. Now that we have an understanding of all the muscles that make up the core, let's dive in and look at the reasons and some of the red flags that these muscles could be either underactive or not firing properly. Red flag number 1 that your core is weak and needs some work is a movement compensation known as anterior pelvic tilt. Now this is categorized as having tight hip flexors on the front of your hips and having a weak core and low back. So what that looks like, if you look at yourself in the mirror from a side view, you're gonna see that your low back is actually pulled forward and creates an excessive low back arch. What that is telling you, or it could be telling you, is the hip flexors are now becoming short and weak. And when a muscle gets short and weak, what that may materialize is saying that it's actually protecting your core and trying to limit movement around the core, because we have weak muscles surrounding that core. So one way, instead of stretching your hip flexors, which is commonly prescribed, sometimes you actually just need to strengthen your core, get stronger around your hips, and the tight hip flexors will actually relieve themselves as a result. So in addition to having that anterior pelvic tilt in the low body, we're gonna see in the upper body something else materialize, and that's rib flare. So if you're somebody that walks around and you can see your ribs poking out, that means that you've actually created an excessive arch, and as a compensation mechanism, your upper body now overextends, and as a result, your ribs flare out. If you're somebody that struggles to maintain a neutral position when you're doing something like an overhead press or any type of core movement such as a squat and a deadlift, that is a big red flag that your core may be weak and tight. The red flag number 2 that your core may be weak and needs some work is having trouble breathing into the core and the low part of it. Now, if you're someone that breathes high up into your chest and is a chest breather, what you're actually using is your accessory breathing muscles. And the muscles you really need to be working is the diaphragm and your inner core unit, as we discussed in the beginning. If you can't breathe deeply into your core in a way where we're expanding that core in all ways, so not just the front, but everywhere, and then being able to brace that area after, that's a sign to me that your core is weak and needs to be addressed. So guys, one thing you can start doing is doing deep breathing into the stomach. So thinking about breathing low and practicing your breathing mechanics. That's gonna pay dividends later on and protect your low back and your overall lifting career if you can get that down. So make sure you know how to breathe deep into the core, and if you can't do that, something you need to look at. Red flag number 3 that your core may be weak and needs addressing is actually leading off the second point. So now that we have air in our stomach and can breathe low, we need to be able to brace that air, because if we just breathe low into our stomach and then go down through the movement, we don't pressurize the core properly. If you can't hold a tight, stable core like someone's gonna be punching in the stomach, if you can't hold that position through a full set, then guys, your core is weak and you need to work on developing that. Start thinking about doing things such as planks, such as hollow holds, such as quadrupeds, anything where we're having to stabilize and squeeze our core through a whole range of motion for a set period of time. That is what's gonna build up a strong foundation. So red flag number 4 that your core is weak and needs some addressing is you're unable to maintain a neutral spine. Now what that means is your body has a natural curvature to it, and going through a range of motion, let's say we're doing a deadlift for example, if we can't maintain that neutral core through that whole range of motion, it may be an indication that you are lacking the stability in the core to maintain that. Now that could mean either having weakness towards the upper end of the core, so maybe how your lats are tying into your pelvis. Maybe it means how your core and your hips are firing together. As we talked about, they work together to maintain that neutral position. Or it could come back to your breathing. So think about that neutral position as kind of the sum of all the other points we talked about. If we can't maintain that position through a range of motion, it most certainly means that somewhere in our kinetic chain, somewhere in our body, there is a weak link, and we always want to look at that core first. So addressing that area, then moving on to other parts of the body if we don't have any weakness there. But there's nothing wrong with doing extra core work, making sure we're stabilizing and mobilizing our muscles around the core too, to making sure we're in a neutral position through our movements. There's nothing wrong with having a tight core through range of motion. So working to develop it at all times, even if you already have a good foundation, there's always improvements we can make. And one of those ways is just doing movements that engage the core before we get into our work. Then we get into our main lifts, but maintaining, again, that neutral position from the start to an end range of motion. Take the time to engage and stabilize before we get into our movement. So I hope you found this video helpful and shed some light on maybe some weak areas, particularly in the core, that you may need to look at. I would go through all the 4 points that we addressed in terms of the red flags. So looking from the side, first of all, to see if you have an excessive arch or if you have tight hip flexors. Going and seeing if we can breathe properly low into the core. If you can't and you're breathing high in the chest, something to look at. If we can't maintain a neutral position when we're breathing and we can't hold and squeeze our core the whole time through a set, guys, that's another big indication that we need to work on strengthening our core. And if you find that you are struggling with one of those, one or more in particular, feel free to send me a message. We can go through your training and see if we can't help to build you a stronger core. Hope you found this video helpful. See you in the next one. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Take care.